hostel is a budget-friendly, short-term place to stay, where travelers usually share a dorm-style room with several other guests. Most of the beds are bunk beds, stacked to fit as many people as possible into one space, making it a much cheaper option than booking a hotel or an Airbnb. Some dorms are separated by gender, while others are mixed, and bathrooms can either be private or shared with the rest of the floor. Hostels are especially popular with solo travelers who want to save money or who only need a place to sleep rather than somewhere luxurious to relax. The 3 stories you are about to hear come from solo travelers who chose hostels to cut costs and ended up having uncomfortable experiences with the strangers they shared rooms with. For a while after my breakup, I had been talking to a French girl I matched with on a dating app. We texted constantly at first, then started calling and FaceTiming almost every night. We really clicked, but she still lived at home with her strict parents. When the topic of me visiting her came up, she explained that she would not be able to let me stay at her house. I suggested we share a hotel room, but she said that at least for the first few nights after meeting in person, she did not want to do that because her parents would completely lose it. I was only 23 and not exactly rolling in money, so I booked a bed at a hostel near her place in Paris. Before my 7-hour flight, I downloaded a couple of movies since I already knew I would not be able to sleep. I never do on planes. Sure enough, I could not fall asleep at all. By the time I landed and took an Uber to the hostel, I had been awake for a full day. I was beyond exhausted. Because of the 6-hour time difference, it was around 3 in the morning local time, which at least meant I could go straight to bed and hopefully avoid feeling jet-lagged the next day. When I arrived, the hostel was not exactly impressive. It was small, the lobby had a strange smell lingering in the air, and the guy at the front desk looked like he would rather be anywhere else. To be fair, it was 3 in the morning, so I could not blame him too much. I found my assigned room. There were 6 beds total. 5 of them were empty, but one had a guy sitting on it with his laptop open, typing intensely. He glanced up at me for a second, then went right back to whatever he was doing. I said hey, but he did not respond. He seemed completely absorbed in his screen, so I chose an empty bed and lay down. The room light was still on, though. I asked him if it was all right to turn the light off. He looked at me with a blank stare and did not say anything. Thinking he might not have heard me, I asked again. This time he slowly nodded and gave me a strange smile. I got up and switched off the lights. Because I was so tired, I fell asleep almost instantly. A couple of hours later, I woke up. The room was still dark, and I had no idea what had disturbed me. I rolled onto my side and tried to look around. Even in the near darkness, I could tell that all the beds were empty, every single one. The guy who had been there earlier was nowhere to be seen. The bunks beside me were empty on both the top and bottom. Still, I was sure something had woken me. I checked my phone. It was 5 in the morning. I desperately needed more sleep, so I told myself he probably left, and maybe some noise from the hallway had startled me. I turned back onto my side and closed my eyes. The faint sound of traffic outside drifted through the window. Then I felt the bed shake slightly. The metal frame made a small creaking noise, followed by this disturbing sound of heavy breathing. I opened my eyes and looked up. Hanging upside down from the top bunk directly above me was a head peering over the edge, staring down at me. It was him. I could see that same unsettling smile on his face. His medium-length dark hair hung downward because he was upside down. The image was so horrifying that it is hard to fully describe. I screamed and scrambled off the bed once I realized what I was seeing. He pulled himself upright onto the top bunk and kept staring at me. I yelled, asking what he was doing, and threw the nearest object I could grab in his direction. He started laughing, this strange, unsettling laugh that made my skin crawl. I quickly turned on the light and began checking my belongings to make sure nothing was missing. keeping one eye on him the whole time. Then I heard the sound of a phone camera clicking. I looked up and saw him holding his phone toward me. He had just taken a picture of me. He continued laughing while staring. Something about him was not right. I did not know if he was mentally unstable or if he had worse intentions. I stuffed my things back into my bag and went straight to the front desk to demand a different room, preferably a private one. I explained what had happened and asked if they could lower the price, but they refused. The staff member said he would go check on the guest in my previous room. I did not contact the police because I was unsure whether he had technically broken any laws, but I definitely left a detailed review about the hostel afterward. The rest of my trip turned out fine. I enjoyed my time with the girl I had come to see. Still, every time I walked back into that hostel, I felt anxious that I might run into that guy again. The thought that there is a photo of me on that creep's phone still bothers me. I am not usually someone who resorts to violence, but in that moment, I honestly wish I had reacted differently. I travel alone quite often, and over the years I have stayed in many hostels to save money and meet interesting people from around the world. I would estimate that I have stayed in about 20 different hostels in my life, and most of the time my experiences have been positive. I would say around 90% have been perfectly fine. My first genuinely terrible experience, however, happened at a place called Freedom Traveler Hostel, and before I get into it, I want to make it clear that what happened was not entirely the hostel's fault. Freedom Traveler Hostel is located in Rome. It was my first visit to the city, and I was completely unfamiliar with the area. I depended heavily on Google Maps and asking locals for directions. Even locating the hostel turned into a challenge because there were no visible signs outside the building. Once I finally figured it out, I stepped through the large brown doors and was welcomed by a friendly woman at the front desk. I had already reserved a bed in a 4-person room. She showed me to the room where I would be staying. It had 1 bunk bed and 2 single beds, so 4 sleeping spots in total. The room had a green color theme and was not particularly spacious. She mentioned that the hostel was not very busy at the time, which I did not mind since that likely meant more privacy for me. The woman kept smiling and was very helpful. She pointed out where I could store my luggage, which turned out to be a small shed in the back garden. I was not impressed with that setup and did not feel comfortable leaving my belongings there, so I chose to keep my bag in the room, especially since I was not carrying anything especially valuable. After a full day of traveling, I was drained. I changed into more comfortable clothes, slid my luggage under the bottom bunk, and lay down planning to take a short nap. Soon after I closed my eyes, there was a knock at the door, and 2 young men entered. From the moment they spoke, I could tell by their strong accents that they were Italian. They greeted me and immediately began talking, even though I was clearly trying to rest. I am naturally polite and fairly social, so I engaged in conversation. They introduced themselves as Marco and Lucio and said they were brothers. Marco was enormous, easily around 6'4". Lucio was probably about 5'11" and solidly built as well. They looked very similar in the face, both deeply tanned, with slightly receding hairlines despite appearing to be in their early 20s. They did not look especially warm or welcoming, but at first they seemed decent enough. After we exchanged a few words in English, they began speaking to each other in Italian. They assumed I could not understand them. Unfortunately for them, I could. It quickly became clear they were talking about me and laughing. I distinctly heard one of them, I think Marco, refer to me as some silly white boy. I considered responding in Italian right then to let them know I understood, but I decided to pretend I did not. Eventually, the brothers stood up and left the room. As they walked out, Lucio turned back and gave me a smile and a small wave. I noticed they had not left any luggage in the room, which made me assume they had placed their belongings in the garden shed storage area. Later, I went out to the garden to socialize and met a few friendly tourists who were also staying there for the weekend. After that, I headed out toward the city center to explore Rome. I spent several hours wandering around and stopped twice to eat before finally returning to the hostel. I expected to see people chatting in the lounge or outside in the garden, but the place was empty. It was around 9 in the evening, so I decided to go to bed early. I do not remember the exact moment I fell asleep, but I remember waking up. The room was still dark, and I could hear hushed voices. The brothers had returned. I stayed completely still and listened. They were whispering in Italian. One of them said something that roughly translated to, "Just grab it," or "Are you going to do it?" I did not know exactly what they were referring to, but I suspected they meant my bag. I waited, expecting to hear my luggage being moved before revealing that I was awake. Instead, I suddenly felt a cold, damp cloth pressed firmly over my face. It had a sweet smell. I immediately panicked, shouted, and swatted it away. I looked up and saw one of the brothers standing over me. I yelled, "What are you doing?" He climbed onto the lower bed and tried to hold me down, but I kicked him off and screamed for help. The other brother grabbed him and pulled him away, and the two of them ran out of the room. I grabbed my bag and shoes as fast as I could and rushed to the front desk. A different man was working at that time. He told me he had seen the two men leave, but there was no record of them actually being guests at the hostel. They were local men who had come in pretending to stay there and were targeting travelers. They had genuinely attempted to knock me out with chloroform. I left immediately after that. I would hope security has improved since then, but at the time, it seemed like anyone could walk in without question. If I had not woken up, I likely would have been rendered unconscious and robbed of everything in my bag. After that night, I became far more cautious about the hostels I choose and the security measures they have in place. I took a solo trip to Miami Beach once during Art Basel, partly for the event and partly to get away from the freezing weather back home. My friend Mia was going to be there with her boyfriend, and I planned to spend time with them, but I had my own place to stay. Hotels and Airbnbs in Miami can be very expensive, especially when you are traveling alone, so I booked a bed at a place called Bikini Hostel. It is located right in the middle of Miami Beach and was pretty busy when I arrived. Even the check-in area had a crowd. The atmosphere felt young, mostly people in their 20s. Some were traveling in groups, others were on their own like me. I did not plan on hanging around the hostel much since it was really just somewhere to sleep. They had lockers available for storing belongings, which allowed me to spend the entire day out without worrying about my things. It was not until that first night, when I returned, that I really interacted with the other people sharing my room. I was assigned to a mixed dorm, meaning both men and women stayed there, though I ended up being the only woman in the room. I was not thrilled about that, but I was there to save money, not to make friends. I briefly met about 3 of the other guests staying in the room. The next morning I woke up and immediately reached for my phone, which I was sure I had left on my bed. It was not there. I searched the bed thoroughly and even checked underneath it. At that point, I started to think someone in the room must have taken it. I asked everyone if they had seen it. I even asked the guy in the bed next to me to call my number so we could listen for it ringing, but we heard nothing. For a moment, I questioned whether I had actually brought it back to the room the night before. I borrowed that same guy's phone to call Mia and explained that my phone was missing and to tell her to meet me, the brunch spot we had planned to go to. Before leaving, I searched the room again and spoke with the front desk, asking them to contact Mia if anyone turned my phone in. Then I headed out to meet her and her boyfriend at a place on Collins Avenue for brunch. While we were there, I logged into iCloud on Mia's phone and checked the Find My iPhone feature. It showed that the last known location was the hostel about 2 hours earlier. That gave me a bit of comfort because it suggested I might have left it in my bag or locker. The three of us returned to the hostel and searched everywhere, including the locker and my luggage. Still nothing. It made no sense, but I refused to let it ruin my trip. We walked to the convention center, where Art Basel was taking place. After spending hours there, we grabbed a late lunch that turned into an early dinner and then visited a few bars. At one point, I checked to find my iPhone again, using Mia's phone. This time, it showed that my phone had moved and was practically right where we were standing. Mia and her boyfriend laughed and asked if I was absolutely sure it was not in my purse or pocket. I told them I was certain it was not. I scanned the area trying to figure out who could have it, but I had no idea what to look for. Once I realized someone definitely had it, I put the phone into lost mode. Mia's boyfriend loudly asked if anyone had found a lost phone. No one admitted to it, though several people stared at us and a few quickly walked away. We called my phone repeatedly. It rang, but nobody answered. Later that night, I returned to the hostel to change clothes. On my walk back, I began accepting that I might never get my phone back. However, I could not shake the feeling that a strange-looking man was following me. He made every turn I did. I do not think he realized I noticed him, but I was almost certain he was trailing me. Once back in my room, I opened my laptop before changing and checked to find my iPhone again. Now it showed the location back at the hostel. I felt hopeful, thinking maybe someone was finally returning it. I checked with the front desk, but they had not received anything. I asked several people in the hostel as well, but no one claimed to have it. So I logged into Instagram on my laptop and started messaging Mia to update her on when I would be ready to meet them again. I took a quick shower and changed into something more suitable for going out. When I stepped back into the room, I froze. The same man I believed had followed me was sitting on one of the beds scrolling on his phone. Two other guys were in the room at the time, but I suddenly had a strong suspicion. I quickly messaged Mia and told her to call my phone immediately. She agreed, and seconds later, I heard the sound of a phone vibrating nearby, either in a pocket or on a bed. I looked up at the man, and he looked at me at the exact same moment with a guilty expression. That was all the confirmation I needed. I started shouting at him to give me my phone, telling him I knew he had it. The other two guys jumped in to help me and demanded that he empty his pockets. He complied and pulled out a phone. It was mine. I grabbed it from his hand and told the other two that he had been following me all day and had likely stolen it while I was asleep. He stood up, grabbed his backpack, and rushed out of the building, never to be seen again. The two guys who helped me introduced themselves as Mark and Paulo, and we quickly became friendly. I invited them to join me when I went out to meet Mia. I am thankful they were there to support me, because I often wonder how the situation might have turned out if I had been alone. Since then, I always make sure to keep my phone and valuables secured in the safest place possible when staying in a hostel, and I pay close attention to the people around me.